My title is Back to the Homeland or Stay Abroad, and it has two meanings. On the one hand, it's about globalization. Is globalization headed for the rocks? And the other is with regard to the resource juniors. Should we be heading back to safer, closer to home jurisdictions as this bear market drags on? And this bear market is indeed dragging on. The scary little thing that you see in the corner right here, this is the collapse of resource sector financing on the TSX venture exchange. And it's back to levels of 2015, and it has been quick and abrupt. I don't have the October numbers, but I don't think they are an improvement. And part of the problem is this cannabis bubble. In September, cannabis stocks were the top 10 traders in terms of volume and value on the venture exchange. Not a single resource junior made it into the top 10. And the problem with the cannabis bubble, which has been sucking away the risk capital oxygen from the junior sector, is October 17th was supposed to be a top, but it's now the story shifting from legalizing it in Canada to legalizing it in America, which 2020, that would be the chance for after that to start happening. So 2 more years of being able to explain operating losses as market development costs, just like during the dot-com bubble. And this past week, when we heard all the stories of all these Canadian producers underestimating Canadian demand for legal pot, well, that has given it a boost. So whatever sell-off we saw in the past couple of weeks, the cannabis bubble is going to stabilize and haunt the resource sector for the conceivable future. So the big event was the midterm elections on Tuesday, and the result was, as had been predicted, a lame duck presidency for Trump, where the Democrats now control the House and can pretty much block anything that is presented by anybody. Now, the question is, when it happened in 2010, when the Tea Party gained control of the House of Representatives, it basically signaled the end of the resource junior bull market. And the question is this time going to be different? And here you see a graphical presentation of, we had a post-2008 crash, a really good rebound in the resource sector. The blue is the resource sector value traded on the venture exchange. But then right after the power shifted at the start of 2011, we went into a bear market. The gold bull was soon, it took until August of 2011 to be toast. And basically we had the Obama crippled. He could not really push anything through Congress and had to use executive orders. And so they relied on quantitative easing to keep the economy grinding away as part of the recovery. They were not able to do the Keynesian fiscal stimulus. And the Republicans pretty much blocked any sort of spending increases by threatening to withhold approval of raising the debt ceiling, which created all this anxiety about a US default and all kinds of hell breaking loose. Now we are, 8 years later, and the table is turned. The situation is in reverse. So the question is, are the Democrats going to play that same game with the Republican presidency over the next couple of years? Now, this graphic here, both of them are essentially on the same scale, even though the right one's wider. The right one are where do federal revenues come from. The purple is income tax, the red is corporate tax, and the green is the social security deductions that get taken off of your paycheck. And on the left, we have a breakdown of where the money goes. And you see the big red military spending, and that's going to be part of the American landscape forever. But the gray and the sort of purple-violet, that's what goes to Medicare and the Social Security. That's money paid out to the retirees who are no longer working. And we've got between up to 2030, we have the entire boomer generation retiring. And that other part that I've got as the segment there, the green and the yellow, that's actually what people who are still of working age are collecting through these various so-called government handouts. And so the question is, and by the way, the green and the purple on the right side all comes from the workers. So we have in the background a really big crisis looming, an intergenerational crisis which will pit younger generation against the retiring older generation that has the highest longevity expectations in the history of mankind. And this is already factored into this graphic. The blue represents a Democrat presidency and the pink Republican presidency. And the little red things in there are all the debt ceiling increases that happened. And this happened as a rubber stamp thing, definitely during the Bush administration when they increased it by more than anybody else. But it stopped during the Obama administration and it became a huge struggle. And what you see now with the Trump administration is to 2023, assuming that he gets reelected in 2020, each year what the ombudsman projects the deficit to be. So what everybody was complaining about in the last 8 years about the US debt and all that, none of that is changing. In fact, there's a joke making the rounds now that the only thing worse than tax and spend is no tax and spend. So where is now the whole gold bug story? Well, it's actually alive and well as it has ever been. We have now interest rates approaching normalization, and if the economy continues to be strong in the US as it has been, we can expect the interest rates to continue to rise. We also have the US dollar, which has been since sort of mid-2016 in a weakening trend. Since the start of 2018 has had a strengthening trend. And that happened when it became clear that Trump's next two things that he was going to tackle was one, protectionism, to bring manufacturing back to America. And the other was his sort of attack on other nations, his aggressive manner towards Europe, allies, and even with the North Korean situation, raising fears of geopolitical conflict that could destabilize the world. And so now you have the US dollar rising, which is not particularly helpful to Trump because he wants the dollar to be kind of so that when all these tariffs kick in, China doesn't end up getting it all back because of the weaker US dollar, and manufacturers or producers have less reason to move manufacturing back to the United States. But all this stuff that we've been hearing about, it's all just a distraction. The real issue is embedded in this chart, and it's the pink line and the blue line, which is the share of global GDP represented by the United States and China. And you can see them converging. These are using IMF projections to the end of 2022. And you can see the American share gradually declining. And 2025 has become this thing that makes the president very angry, and China has realized that that's a very inflammatory thing, because they had come out and said by 2025, we want to be technologically self-sufficient. We think 2025 is when we start coming into our own as an equal to America. And that is the underlying crisis behind everything that is being done by the US administration, is how to diffuse that. The Obama administration's strategy was one, how can we finesse this towards a 2030 future where global power is now balanced between China and the United States? But the tact now taken is we need to crush China, put them back where they belong, and stay the single power. And this is a hopeless situation. China is not going to stand down. So we're entering a very turbulent period where the current policy strategy of the United States is to undermine China, and China's total goal is to resist that. So if you look at this chart, what's interesting here is this long decline, pretty much starting with the Bush administration and globalization really coming into its own, and also China rising, all these manufacturing jobs. And when the crash happened, things changed. Manufacturing jobs have actually started to increase, and now with the help of the elimination of or reduction of corporate tax down to 21%, now we're seeing an acceleration of the reshoring of manufacturing. But this process was already underway because doing business in China has not been particularly good for Western companies because their technology gets stolen. They get the runaround from the bureaucracy that favors the domestic companies, and they're forced to do these partnerships which don't really make sense in a competitive way. And the big idea that Democrats and Republicans both agree on is this Chinese thing of stealing jobs and having an unfair playing field is actually an interest we all share. And so it was interesting that Trump, in his victory speech on Wednesday morning, said the key things we're going to work with the Democrats are on infrastructure, trade, and health. He's absolutely happy that he no longer has to deal with completely repealing Obamacare. That's now not his problem anymore. And of course, infrastructure is a promise he made, and it's one that the Democrats share, so they will probably be able to work together on that. And of course, trade. Democrats at heart, when it's not the 1% elite liberals that everybody talks about, they also don't like this globalization where the jobs all move into the lowest cost jurisdiction. So there's a lot that Trump can work with the Democrats on. The question is it going to turn into a violent struggle where he says it's going to turn into a state of war between him and the Democrats, or is it going to be collaborative? And my guess is that the Democrats will probably be in a collaborative mode because the whole thing is about 2020. And they also know that if the economy continues to grow and things do get better, that deep-seated anger that's out there will dissipate. I mean, one of the interesting things about rural America is you don't find a lot of ethnic minorities in these places. The people who are most upset about immigrants are those who have the least, for whom there is the least visibility of these immigrants. In places like California and that, we don't care, it's not a problem for us. But in these other parts, they are now the sort of the bogeyman that everything gets blamed on. But it all has its root in the fact that they feel stressed, no light at the end of the tunnel. And when light starts to return, this will actually disappear. They'll stop hating all these groups and start saying, let's get back to a country with a dignified leadership that isn't calling each other names and trashing each other. But even against this backdrop, we have a world full of geopolitical flashpoints. We've got Putin in Russia with a goal of moving into Europe, fanning populism. We've got Trump as part of his strategy also fueling populism, and happy that Salvino and all the Orban and all these people who are emerging in Europe as the new sort of right-wing leadership. He's all happy for that because he sees it as destabilizing Europe as a major competitor. Xi Jinping, of course, he's the biggest player in there. Kim Jong-un, he is this little nuisance person who causes way more trouble than he should actually deserve. But a new player and two new players in the field are Mohammed bin Salman, who for some reason somehow let his people think taking care of a critic in the manner that they did was okay. And we've got Trump sort of trying to destabilize Iran, but now you've got this problem in Saudi Arabia, things shifting towards a thug type of leadership everywhere. And then the new player in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, who thinks it was really great when the military dictatorship ran Brazil, and who won, even got part of the gay vote, although he bashed gays. And the one outlier in the left wing is Obrador out of Mexico. He is an old-style socialist, and he feeds perfectly off Trump because they are now sort of arch enemies. So all kinds of trouble potentially coming out of Mexico. But what you see is you're going to see South America all become sort of back to right-wing 70s style thing, and that's going to mesh well with American interests. China, it's going to end up giving up on North and South America and shift more towards a relationship with Australia and in its backyard. Africa is going to remain this place that everybody jockeys for to get a piece of. And Europe will probably end up under the dominion of Russia because all these populists who are in the ascendancy in Europe, they all think Putin is great and would like to have a strong leader like him in charge of their countries. So this is a chart I've been using since 2008. This is how I think globalization will look by 2030. So we will have shrunken trading zones where there will not be huge interaction between these different areas. But there's two problems that come out of that. One, some of these areas have a disproportionate share of output of the raw materials, the commodities that David Forrest was talking about earlier, come from. The other is the demise of TINA, which means there is no alternative to the US dollar. Right now, there isn't. And that's the reason gold has not gone up. But if we shift into a world that starts to fragment, these other trading zones will start using different currencies. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's the anticipation of the shift as people understand that this is almost an inexorable process that's happening. That's going to bring back the popularity of gold. And here's a long-term chart of gold. Basically, that 0% means that $400 gold in 1980 is the same, inflation adjusted, to the present as where gold is right now, except that there's been the outstanding gold stock has nearly doubled during the intervening 30, 40 years. And it also explains why money is not being made in a big way in the gold sector, because the low-hanging fruit has been harvested. Now, here's another one of my old favorites. This is the value of the existing gold stock in every year divided by nominal global GDP in that year. And you can see in 1980, when gold shot as high as $800, that was 25%. And of course, in the meantime, we've had almost a doubling of the gold stock. And during that run to $1,900, that was only 14%. Now it's motoring along at sort of 9%. It's stabilized here, and everybody's bored with gold. But the question is, what will cause the world to demand more gold ownership so that the resulting price, given what you can produce each year, about 80, 90 million ounces, how high can gold go in real terms? And this isn't the inflation adjustment type of thing that some speakers like to talk about. This is that type of real gain that happened in the 70s that was massively valuable for the juniors. And here's that same chart converted back into a gold price where you see that $3,464 price. That's the equivalent of $800 gold in 1980, understood as a period of extreme stress where the value of the gold stock was 25% of GDP. Now, none of this has to happen, but we're entering a period of uncertainty where this very much can happen, and it can happen suddenly and violently. And I think this gridlock period, how it plays out, will determine how soon this happens. But in any case, I think it's unavoidable that somehow China and the United States will become ever more equal. And whether that turns out to be harmonious or not, it's going to cause a lot of demand for gold to erupt that pushes up the real price. Because when this starts to happen, there will be no sellers of gold. So the other thing is security of supply. Where does stuff come from? And this is one of my favorite topics, but I'm not going to talk too much, but here are two good examples. On my website, you'll find all these metals with maps like this showing where they come from. Cobalt on the left. We now have in the Congo, poor Katanga has found out that it's cobalt is contaminated with uranium from the current source where it's mining from, so it has had to suspend cobalt production. So even though cobalt's been sort of in retreat, expect that to go up. But the hot new play is the vanadium, and of course there's lots of it comes from China, lots of it comes from South Africa, and lots from Russia, but those are all parts outside that no-so-America, newly fragmented world order that I'm seeing. So the hunt for vanadium in places that are closer to home, those are the types of stories that are going to capture the imagination of the public. In the case of vanadium, we have new technology in the form of batteries coming into play. But until all this really starts to unfold, we still have discovery exploration, and here are two companies that are here. I haven't recommended them. I've talked about them in Discovery Watch. Great Bear with its Dixie project with a potential Red Lake-style discovery, and West Haven Ventures with its Shovel Nose and the Spences Bridge gold belt of southern British Columbia, high-grade gold, silver. We have the Sable guys, which is the Aurelian guys, staking everything that's available and saying, this has been an underexplored district similar to what we had in Ecuador. So this is going back to home, going back to discovery exploration, and you can see those sorts of gains there. And these are stories which could go substantially higher than that yet. And just as I'm wrapping up here, just to let you know of what I've got some changes coming. In the new year, there'll be just one basic membership that gives you access to everything. It's going to be at a cheaper price than it is now. And I've already put all the profiles, all the comments, historical and present, back under the paywall. But I have created a new page called a free corporate profile, which is a stripped down version. This new map system that I've created, it allows you to find stuff and funnel in. So for all those people out there who don't subscribe to me, which is probably most of you, the site will be extremely useful still to home in on where stuff is happening. Because until we get back into a price-driven bubble market, everything's still going to be pretty focused. And you're going to need tools like this to be able to find where the action is, home in, assess whether it still has running room, and place your bets. I'm hoping for the day when pigs and turkeys in the resource sector fly again, but we really do need that sort of massive move in the price of gold. But the point today is that we are now in the zone, because whatever Trump and Nancy Pelosi figure out, it's going to all be good for the old gold bug narrative for owning gold. And this, again, is a shot of what you can find. Every one of those little icons will take you to a card, which will take you to the free corporate profile, from which you can go into my site or off to other off-site services. Thank you.